Hey guys, subscribe for daily content. And if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks! What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I'm going to be talking about the brand new Hinderer Project X folding knife and how it directly compares to the ever popular XM18 3.5 inch and the XM24. I did do a full comprehensive review of the Project X, which you can go and watch, and I made a couple of comparisons with the XM18 and 24, but I really wanted to do a full, in-depth breakdown and comparison with these knives for anybody who was interested. Now, the first difficulty you're going to be faced with when trying to decide which of these knives is for you is availability. Yes, they are very difficult to get your hands on, but if you're persistent, if you're watching retailers, you're paying attention to the Hinderer Knives users and collectors group on Facebook, paying attention to Instagram, etc., you definitely can get your hands on these things. So that's really who this video is for. Thanks so much to my generous patrons who are supporting me right now. There's a link for Patreon right down below, and please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. We're going to do some simple specs here real quick, measure out each of these knives. If you're new to Hinderer knives, this is kind of, you might have been looking at the XM18 and XM24 for a while trying to decide, these things are freaking expensive. If I'm going to go for one, which do I go with? And then the Project X comes out, and while it would nicely compare with a lot of different knives in Hinderer's line. Number one, I don't own every single Hinderer knife, but it compares, I think, quite a bit, right? It's a good comparison up against the 24 and XM18 because it's right in between, literally. The overall length of the XM24, the biggest boy of the bunch, is 9¼ inches. It has a 4-inch blade, and it has about 3.6 inches of cutting edge. The Hinderer Project X is 8.75 inches overall and has about 3.6 inches of blade and 3.6 inches of cutting edge. That's an important thing to think about. The cutting edge of the Project X is literally identical to the XM24, and it's mainly because there's no, well, I call it a forward choil. Every time I call it that, someone says this. Well, there's no choil up there. There's no finger choil up there, right? It's a sharpening choil. The XM18 3.5 inch is about 8¼ inches overall, 3.5 inch blade, and it's got about 3¼ inches of cutting edge. So, ratios, people, right? I'm talking about overall knife, so I like blade to handle ratio. Yeah, the Project X is definitely better than both, for sure. Let's talk about the thickness between all three of them. Stack them up. I'm sure you guys at this point have seen countless videos comparing the XM18 and XM24, literally dating all the way back to probably 2010 on YouTube. Saying that because I've watched all of them obsessively. Measurement of thickness between these three, I believe, if I remember correctly from the Project X review, it is nearly the same blade stock thickness as the XM18 3.5 inch, which is about, it says 163, it's about 165 thousandths. That's the standard thickness. We're not talking about the fatty versions of the XM18 3.5 inch or the skinny versions, which have different blade stock thicknesses, right? This guy, Project X, coming in, once again, it says 162. It's going to be about 165. So the same blade stock thickness as the XM18 3.5 inch. And then your XM24, definitely the thickest at, it says 180. I believe it's actually 187 thousandths, and it's just my crappy calipers, right? I have these two guys out here today because they are the closest to how Hinderers come stock. This guy is stock, right? So this will be very accurate. This guy does have a carbon fiber scale on it, but my only other XM24 has a titanium scale on it, which is not going to give you an accurate measurement of weight stock. So let's go ahead and fire this thing up. The XM18 3.5 inch is coming in at 5.54 ounces. Now that will slightly vary depending on what blade shape you get, but it's essentially true for all standard models. They will weigh a little bit less if they are skinny variants, and they'll weigh a little bit more if they are fatty variants. The Project X, which does not have skinny or fatty variants right now, is pretty heavy at 6.31 ounces. So about 0.8 ounces heavier than the XM18. And then the XM24 is absolutely going to take the cake at 7.62 ounces. Way heavier than both. Let's go ahead and take a look at hardware on these guys. This is a pretty big difference here, right? Hinderer knives have always been known for being modular. While Rick Hinderer struggles to keep up with the demand for his knives, you have to remember, Rick Hinderer is not Spyderco. He's not SOG. He's not Gerber, right? He is a much, much, much tinier entity. And on top of that, there is much, much, much more work that goes into his knives than something like a Gerber paraframe. So that's part of the reason why these things just aren't massively available. That mixed with the demand. And also why they cost so much, because these things are all actually manufactured in the United States. I think everything but maybe the bearings and maybe the washers, I'm not really sure, but I believe every other thing, and he's got tours of his shop and everything like that. Everything else is made in the United States, so they're just going to be expensive. But anyways, taking a look at the hardware on the classic XM18 3.5 inch, we have of course the flathead pivot. We've got some hex screws, then we have some Phillips heads over here, and then we have smaller hex screws. So while they are modular, and Rick Hinderer sells a ton of hardware, I mean, as you can see here, I mean, this one's customized. It's all the hardware's been blacked out, which did not come that way from the factory. There's some steel flame bling on it. This has got a carbon fiber scale, right? But taking them apart is not difficult, but it does require multiple tools. Where this guy truly shines, right? And there's some other areas where it's going to shine, but where it truly shines is the fact that it has the tool integrated, as the backspacer. And this tool has two different heads at the tip, and that will allow you to turn, or you can, remove or adjust the pivot, the body screws, or the pocket clip, pretty much anything on the knife except for the lock bar screw, which does not need to be messed with, right? So this is super handy for disassembly, and I have done this. It's very, very simple to take this knife apart. Very simple. Anybody worried about losing the backspacer? I wouldn't. You're going to have to, for that to happen, you'd have to take it out, lay it down, and walk off. As long as you put it back, which, that is a possibility, all right? But that's the same with any tool, right? Put your tools away so you don't lose them. With this thing in as the backspacer, there is no way. You really have to dig at it. And it's, stuck in place. This spring allows it to, you can see it's kind of, when you push it down, it snaps into place and that spring pushes it forward. So it really is in there. But that tool solves that problem of having to use a whole bunch of, it's also got less hardware overall. And the pivot is captive, whereas on the Hinderer, it is not. And you have to use a spanner bit or nail clippers or a penny with a notch cut out of it, right? Or the official Hinderer Armors tool, right? Which is $80. Don't do that. You have to do that with these old ones. Now, anybody who's if you're like me and you've been collecting Hinderer knives, you just kind of have gotten used to that. The tolerances are good enough on the XM18 and XM24 generally that once you get these started, right? I mean, I've even taken credit cards and cut them to fit inside there and just kind of held it. Everything's tight enough. There's enough friction that eventually you can just get that out. And sometimes I don't even have to use a tool. Just use my finger, right? So it's not a deal breaker. It's a little bit annoying. But this guy is substantially better in the adjustment and disassembly department. And that fact is made, this knife is made more desirable, and that fact is driven home better by mentioning that because this is a tri-way model, you can see right here, we have the tri-way pivot system. Because this is a tri-way model, it means that the internals, right, the pivot internals can be switched out from bearings to phosphor bronze washers to nylon washers, which it comes with, right? So because this is so much easier to disassemble, right? These knives are made to be able to sort of adapt to whatever environment you're going to be working in, it makes it that much easier to just pop the tool out, switch things around, put it back together, get it the way you want, and then go back to your business, right? There's no other knife on the market that makes it that easy, except for, you could make an argument for like the CRKT, whatever that one is that has it just has like a lever and it pops open, right? So yeah, not really anything else exactly like this. The tri-way pivot system is awesome on all of Hinderer's knives. I think, everything moving forward is going to be tri-way, which makes sense, right? Why make it just one way when you can, make it the way that everybody likes it, or allow people to make it the way that they like it. So yeah, it just, that makes a lot more sense on this knife. I want to talk about action, and detent. So something that has plagued the XM18 since it was first a thing is the fact that the flipper tab is horribly hook shaped, and we have a landing zone that is roughly the equivalent of punching a cactus. It's not comfortable. The flipper tab is hook shaped not because of a blunder. It's first and foremost designed as a finger guard. You can see it follows the curvature perfectly right there, right? So the detent on Hinderer knives now, right, if you are, if this is the first time you've watched anything about Hinderer knives since about 2013 or 2014, you'll be happy to know that the detent and action in general on Hinderer knives is about 100 times better than it used to be. The detents used to be too weak, the action was kind of sloppy, and sometimes lockup wasn't all that great. All of that has been fixed. Anomalies do occur, but I've owned over 35 Hinderers, most of them being tri-way variants, and the consistency, quality, all of that, it's all there. Rest assured, generally speaking, if you buy a Hinderer product, you're going to get all of that. So the detent and everything is fine, lockout's great, but it is definitely not comfortable to flip an XM18. Deploying it with the thumb studs, if you have a flipper variant, which is those are going to be the heaviest detent variants, is not a super fun experience because the thumb stud has a different primary purpose, and those are as external stops. So their position is not optimized for deployment. They can be used for deployment, but they are optimized for or positioned specifically to be external stops. We don't have to worry about that on the Project X because it doesn't use them. It's the same idea. Well, it's not the same idea. It's a fixed stop pin, but it's internal writing on a channel on the blade. So the action is good, but how comfortable is it to deploy this thing? It's not. The best versions of XM18s for deployment are non-flippers, not because they position the thumb studs differently, but because the detent is tuned a little bit lighter, which makes it easier to deploy with the thumb stud. And honestly, the best version overall is the DLT Trading exclusive non-flipper fullered spear. There's a little fuller in there, which allows you to kind of reverse kick it out or just open it with two hands. That's my favorite variant, but I'm trying to get one of those right now, and I've waited for over a year, and it's very difficult. So it's just one of those things, right? They make a lot of different versions of stuff. It's just really hard to get any of it. So yeah. Anyways, deployment, not super great. And on the XM24, it's the exact same story, except everything is worse. The XM24 is an awesome knife. This big, powerful, monstrous thing, right? Big, thick, crazy. It's kind of overkill in a lot of departments, and because everything is just stretched out and made bigger and bulkier, you have a bigger, more hooked blade, more hooked flipper tab that has a heavier detent and is more painful to interact with, and therefore you are slamming down or punching cactuses even harder. Opening this with your thumb, I'll do it. It's not, doesn't feel good to do that. It actually is pretty painful to deploy the XM24 with your thumb stud. Now, as is the case with all things, you will adapt to it, right? Everything I'm saying here, right, it comes down to one simple fact, and that's that this guy is just substantially easier to deploy. The flipper tab is way less hooked. It is still hooked, right? But this is so much more comfortable. And you can see here, if you watch my finger, where it lands is behind the jimping. So you still have that, but we don't have it back here where we don't really need it. So this guy is much more comfortable to deploy. And it doesn't have thumb studs. Maybe it could have them, but it doesn't. And I don't think it really needs them. I think it would be really cool if they did a non-flipper version of this and maybe included thumb studs in the future, but I don't know, you know, with the position of this or how this is shaped, it may be that the thumb studs just aren't really in the cards. You can see there where the thumb stud would have to be to clear that part of this. So the one deployment method that this thing has works, well, it works the same way. It's just way more comfortable than on the XM18 or the XM24. You have jimping back here, but everything's been nicely rounded off, and this hook is just way less aggressive. So everything here, whether you want to push button it or you want to light switch it, it'll work just fine. The detent is also great, and honestly, you know, just smoothness in general is no different than the XM18 that I've got right here. I've got some older XM18s that are completely and totally, this one's actually getting to be false shut now. When I got this, that wasn't the case. But it will eventually be the case for this guy as well, I can tell. Once that detent ball rides its, or creates its track on the blade tank, or the blade face, it'll start doing that. You can speed that process up by putting a little bit of 10-weight nano oil on the detent ball. Let's talk about the ergonomic comfort in general. So all of these are pretty good, and I'll tell you, the ergonomic lines, it's all pretty much exactly the same thing. Those of you who have a Manix 2 from Spyderco laying around, if you've never handled a Hinderer, the Spyderco Manix 2 has almost identical ergonomic lines. Obviously, they feel different because the mass, everything is different. But yeah, between the XM24 and the XM18, your fingers are all going to fall in relatively the same type of pockets. It's just how much room do you have for your full hand. If you have truly monstrous hands, and I don't mean, I wear an XL glove, yeah, I got big hands. No, if you wear an XL glove, you're like me, and truthfully, you're like a lot of guys, right? I wear an XL glove. I probably have pretty average sized hands for a dude, right? And that's just guesswork. I have no idea, right? The XM18 fits in my hands, and it's reasonably comfortable. I used to really enjoy this thing a lot. I used to just, you know, just constantly talk about how great the ergonomics of the XM18 were, but as is the case with a lot of stuff like this, once you experience more, you kind of go, is it all that great? I'd still give it a B, right? It's still pretty good. Choking up on it, if you got a flipper version, not super duper comfortable because you don't have a whole lot of room to get your finger in there. And honestly, you can see right there, you're gonna end up, if you try to use it like this, especially if you're not wearing gloves, you might end up cutting yourself, right? On the non-flipper versions, it's not nearly as bad because that flipper tab's not in the way and you can get back a little bit from the blade. The pocket clip is a little bit of a hot spot and the whole thing is kind of blocky even though the edges are nicely chamfered and everything like that, but it's good. And you know, if you're gonna hang on to something like this and you're gonna work all day with it, there are far less comfortable bladed tools to be working with, so it's okay. The XM24, you have a crap load of room and honestly, it's a lot more comfortable. The pocket clip isn't digging into the middle of your hand. Something about there being more material, this thing being bigger, it actually just feels better, like it would wear your hand down less quickly than the XM18, and that choil is bigger and deeper, so you really can get in there. You can see the same, you know, part of my finger is just buried in that massive choil, right? So you really can get up there. It is very comfortable. The ergonomics on this guy, also very comfortable. Nice, large, open handle room. I will say, while it is comfortable and basically the one place you can hold it, because there's no, you know, what I call a forward choil. I know it's not really, right? But there is no choil up here for your finger. And if your hands are about my size, you're going to be stuck in exactly this spot. You choke back, you're going to get this thing, which you can do, right? I mean, that is exactly what this area is made for, is a 3-finger sort of impact chopping, right? You can do that and it'll lock you in. Most of the time you're gonna be holding it like this, and that's pretty much the only way that you can hold it, right? If your hands are bigger than mine, you're never gonna get a comfortable grip on this guy. I wish that they had not done this part back here and just let it, you know, just kind of taper off like, it's a lot more like they did on the ZT-0560, which this thing is the closest to, right? I like on the XM18 how it just kind of falls off there, so you can get back here, you can still chop with it, you're not as locked in. XM24, you can rock back here and still get a full 4-finger grip, right? Definitely. So in some ways, this is just as, if not, well, it's just as comfortable as the XM24. You just only have one spot that you're going to hold. If your hands are smaller than mine, then you're going to be plenty comfortable on this guy. Edges all nicely, knocked down, everything like that. Still plenty comfortable. Still not amazing, right? I would say overall ergonomic experience with the XM18 3.5 inch is probably a B, and I would give the XM24 a B plus or A minus, and same way with this guy, B plus or A minus. Certainly not the greatest, pretty good, but certainly not the greatest ergonomic experience I've ever handled. Let's talk about options. So a quick note here, even though the Project X has a blade stock thickness that is the same as the standard XM18 3.5 inch, it is ground at the edge, much closer to a skinny XM18. Now, I know that there are different blade shapes, right? We have slicers, and we got spantos, and harpoon spantos, and skinners, and they're all ground a little bit different at the edge. I'm going to guess that this general taper from this general zone of flat is going to be consistent between the inevitable varying blade shapes of Project X knives that we're going to see, but this is the only one we have right now. We have clip point. I am certain that he will do a harpoon spanto, a Bowie. I can almost guarantee this is a clip point, but I can see him doing like the classic Hinderer Bowie with this, right? So they're all going to vary a bit, but I have a feeling they're going to be thinner at the edge than what we normally expect with the XM18 3.5 inch and definitely the XM24. If you want to know which of these knives out here is going to perform the best for just regular day-to-day cutting tasks and nothing insane, like, prying your house off of its foundation or prying the door of a tank away from the frame, this guy's gonna do that. Like, if you're gonna cut dense material, cardboard, rope, rubber, wood, stuff like that, that blade's gonna do it better. These are just a lot thicker, right? Hinderer knives have never really been performance slicers. The sliciest ones you're gonna get are the skinny 3-inch variants, and very specifically in a slicer grind. That's very specific and makes them all that harder to acquire. So generally speaking, probably the Project X is going to perform better, right? And you have better blade to handle ratio anyway, right? So yeah, but we don't have a lot of options when it comes to the options of blade shapes. So while generally speaking, I bet this will perform better, you can get more specialized, funny enough, as the teeter-totter is, you can get more specialized with the XM18 and 24, definitely more so with the XM18. There are more variants. We want to talk about just overall options. The ones floating around out there, if you are, confined to the secondary market out of frustration for trying to get one at a retailer, right? They're all over the place. If you really want to get your hands on an XM18, you can do it right now, but you're going to have to go to the secondary market, and you're probably going to have to overpay for a little bit, but you're still going to have way more options with the XM18 3.5 inch. And honestly, you're going to have way more options with the, there's only a quarter or less of the options for the, XM24 versus the XM18. But you're still going to have way more options in the XM24 than you are with the Project X because this thing is brand new. So, yeah, that's where it isn't going to do quite as good. As far as hardware goes, you're also going to be limited because this thing has its own hardware. The only hardware that it shares with the XM18 and the XM24 or modular hardware is the classic modular hardware, and that's going to be the pocket clip and the lock bar stabilizer, or the LBS disc, right? Those are gonna be, you can go and buy, a different pocket clip. It's all gonna fit exactly the same. It's the same clip that he's had forever. So you can still do that. But if you want, to bling it up like people do with the XM18 and the XM24, you don't have nearly as many options. If he plans to do that in the future, I don't know, right? If he plans to do like a blue anodized, this type of hardware. These standoffs are also their own thing. They are not the same between You can see the center is thicker, and just dimensionally they're thicker. So it's not like the standoffs are interchangeable. And I don't believe it is similar to any other Hinderer models like the Jurassic or the Eclipse or anything like that. I think this is its own thing. And it makes sense because all of this kind of has to, fit with the tool, right? You can take the tool off. You don't want, like, if you don't want to bring the tool with you for fear of losing it, by the way, you can take it off. It's not, this has nothing to do with structural integrity. You can just leave it like this if you want to, and it doesn't look bad. It just looks like a Hinderer knife, right? I think this can also be used as a bottle opener if you want. But anyways, yeah, availability and, availability with varying blade shapes and options and things like that. I think at the time of this video, there's only ever been 2 drops of this guy. Overall fit and finish, exactly the same. There's no difference in overall quality between any of these knives. The Project X, there were not corners cut or anything like that. So yeah, that's an easy one. Aesthetics, this is a personal thing. I like them all. I'm always going to like the way that the XM18 3.5 inch looks the best, right? But this is pretty good. I think to make a point on that, the Jurassic is probably functionally and ergonomically, it's probably Hinderer's best design. It's also one of his ugliest, right? So there's a lot of times it's kind of you got to choose one path or the other, right? Look at Spyderco. Super duper crazy ergonomic most of the time. Very, meant to be manipulated by the human hand. They're also some of the ugliest things I've ever seen in my entire life. So it's kind of hard finding, that perfect balance, but this does it pretty good. It's a pretty good looking knife. It's gonna come down to preference. One thing that I very much love, and this is one of those, it looks good and it also, I think, assists functionally, is the fact that they textured the lock side. This looks infinitely better than just texturing one side. It's kind of bothered me for a long time. It's not a deal breaker, but you're never gonna find a production, I think there are a couple of customs that exist, but you're never gonna find a production XM18, XM24, or most models of Hinderer knives. You're not going to find them. I think maybe the FireTac. I'm not really sure. No, maybe, I don't know. You're not going to find them with textured lock sides. They don't exist. You'd have to have it done custom, and I wouldn't recommend it because you can change the tension, the spring tension on the lock bar that way. So this looks a lot better and it feels a lot better. That texturing is absolutely functional. Just like it a lot more. It's really nice. Also, the jimping on the spine, we didn't mention this. The jimping on the spine of this guy is absolutely superior to the jimping on the XM18. This is old, just like the outside of a grenade, which is fine. The whole thing, this one in particular, the monkey edge version, is like a grenade. But yeah, this is better. The jimping on this is just better. Edges, all these just cut down to the point where it's functional with a glove, comfortable in bare skin, right? Whatever. Really nice. So I don't know that there's a whole lot more. I don't know if we showed the centering on this guy. Did we? Here, just show it. It's great. All of these are mine. Obviously, they've been taken apart. Well, this guy has been taken apart. This guy's never been altered at all, right? All of this, everything's fine. Lockout is all completely and totally solid on all of these. We don't have any pivot lash, detent lash. We have none of that. Of course, you have to take my word for it because you're watching a video right now. But prices between all of these. XM18 3.5 inch. Still, the base price is, if you're not buying some special version of it like this, or you're not buying a black wash or DLC, or because those are all going to cost more money. If you're just buying a stone washed or a working finish Hinderer XM18 3.5 inch, you're looking at, as far as I know, he has not increased the price, $425. That'll get you G10, a titanium liner. Yes, the liner on this side is titanium and is not like the 0562 from ZT that has a steel liner. You get a titanium liner and a titanium lock side. And usually you'll get either CPM 20CV, M390, or S45VN. Those are usually the steels that you'll get. All of them are perfectly acceptable. I think S45VN honestly makes the most sense. This one right here is 3V because it is a monkey edge exclusive variant. The price on this guy, Project X, is $500. So $75 more, You do get a textured lock side and an integrated tool. So that's more so what you're paying. Outside of that, there's not a lot of, in terms of like what could possibly cost more. Those are like the two things that are gonna make it cost more. And perhaps, I don't know, maybe the hardware is more difficult to manufacture. I don't know. It's made, especially like these screws right here are made, and these screws are made to accept the tip of that tool, accommodating for both the smaller and larger heads. So maybe it's more expensive, you know, it's just little pieces of hardware, but he makes that stuff in-house. So you're paying 75 bucks more, you're getting texturing and you're getting an integrated tool. But that's kind of, you gotta make that decision for yourself if that kind of thing is more valuable to you. And then the XM24 is $600, way more. And it's just bigger, right? So there's a lot going for this thing. I mean, like if we take all the biases away, because if you ask me and you're gonna say, what's your favorite? I'm always gonna say, well, the XM18 3.5 inches is my favorite. And that's just what I'm gonna say. Because it is. I don't care if it's not as, you know, if the design is dated versus newer things, or versus, it doesn't matter to me. It's just like, that's my, you know, I'm like, I just like it because I have so many memories with the thing. And I've got mine, I've got another, you know, my user, the one that I use all the time is this guy right here. And I love this thing. This is back when you used to see him in S35VN, which wasn't all that long ago. And I like the XM24. I think the thing is huge and clunky and ridiculous, honestly. If you're looking for an EDC, like this is my honest opinion, right? I love this is a nostalgic love and just like a personal kind of thing, you know? XM24, I just love that it's a Hinderer that's big and crazy and ridiculous, but I also think it's kind of a ridiculous choice for EDC. In fact, I think it's kind of a ridiculous choice for almost any scenario. It's just too big and bulky and crazy, and the best thing I can say about it is, once the blade is deployed, it's probably the one that feels the least offensive to your hand, right? And it's pretty good. I'm not saying that it's bad, you know, yeah. And then the best design of the three is definitely the Project X. I still don't love it as much as the XM18. It still looks very Hinderer. Like if you remove the logos and nobody knew anything about the Project X and you just put this in front of any general knife audience, they'd go, that's a Hinderer. Immediately they would say, that is a Hinderer. It looks like the Ranch Bowie, except a folding knife, right? So yeah, it looks very Hinderer-y, but the aesthetic lines are pretty good. I still think the XM18 is the best looking. I just like the look of the XM18. All of them look extremely American, right? I think people who don't live in the United States look at this, you're like, that's definitely made in the USA. That definitely looks like something that's American, right? Yeah, it's going to be more expensive. You're going to have just as much difficulty, if not more difficulty, getting your hands on this versus an XM18 or XM24. And you're going to be limited when it comes to options. Overall, this is it is good, and it's a much more convenient knife. It's in terms of like just general performance, it's going to perform better, generally speaking, I think, than the XM18 3.5 inch and definitely the 24, right? The one that makes the most sense probably is going to be this guy, but you could make a strong argument still for the XM18, especially if you care about some of the, you know, other things that I mentioned, like your options and customization, things like that. So I don't know that there's really anything else. If I left something out, you know, I'm sorry. I am kind of the, you know, the Hinderer guy on YouTube, it seems like, and so I felt like this might be a good one to do. For those of you who stuck around to the end, I know you're like, why didn't you compare it with the Half Track, or why didn't you compare it with the Jurassic or the Eclipse or the, you know, the Fire Track or the Full Track, right? Like I said, I don't own them. These are going to be the most commonly requested, and they have been the most commonly requested comparisons. So for those of you who are trying to hunt one of these down, maybe for the first time and trying to figure out which is the right one, or for people who are Hinderer knives, you know, Hinderer fans from a long time ago, and maybe you own tons of these and you're wondering, is it worth picking this up? People looking for their first Hinderer, this is a strong first Hinderer. It'd be a great choice. and people who, you know, have had a ton of Hinders. Should you pick up a Project X? Yeah, I think so. That's pretty good. Not anything incredibly amazing. It's not, Rick Hinderer didn't change the world with this one, but it's a good knife, definitely. I think that's everything. I hope that this was enjoyable. I hope it was entertaining, and I hope it was informative for the people who are looking to be informed. Please make sure to, and by the way, I will link Hinderer stuff right down in the description. XM18s, Project X, XM24, everything that has to do with Hinderer knives, I'll put it down in the description. Please make sure to follow me at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do of course have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.